adaptation and in resilience. Informal settlements, dwellers live on what we often call the front lines of climate change. As I said, SDI, we've been doing this for 30 years, not me myself, but a lot of my colleagues and our federation or community leaders, they have been collecting data since the beginning of the network 30 years ago, and using this data for co-producing plans and sort of making risk-informed plans that we often talk about. But one thing that's very important for our networks is it's not just about a better plan, it's also about power. So I actually put on my t-shirt today, which is one of the sayings in the network, which is information is power, if you know how to use it. And that's exactly what we want to focus on today, how such data can help also access finance, shifting narratives, and influencing policies. Before we start, in a bit I will introduce our panel. But before we start, we want to show you a very short movie, just to give you a sense of how this plays out at the local level. So maybe our colleagues there in the back will put on that video, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Slum upgrading is community-powered.
1 billion people live in informal settlements.
And I'm one of them, but I'm proud.
We are not statistics.
We are a movement.
Slum upgrading is innovative finance.
Our communities have mobilized millions through our saving groups.
No collateral required. My home, my investment.
Our community world. Slum upgrading is community data.
We map our own communities.
Count our own homes.
We document our own needs and processes.
This information is our power. When community collects their own data, they write their own future.
Slum upgrading is locally led adaptation.
Our community feel climate change fast. We can't wait for solutions.
We build the solutions ourselves.
Slum upgrading is community resilience.
When disaster strikes, we are fast to respond.
Our network saves lives.
Slum upgrading is youth-driven.
We are not waiting for the future, we are making it.
And the future is now.
Slum upgrading is women-centered.
From planning to implementations.
From saving to constructions.
As women lead this movement.
Slum upgrading is climate action.
We are not waiting for development to happen for us.
We are developing ourselves.
Thank you. Now I want to ask our 4 panelists to come up here and take the chairs. So I have Richard. Richard, thanks for coming straight from the airport. And the first stop of your visit to Brazil is with us here at the Resilience Hub. Fabrizio from Humanitarian Open Street Maps. Isa, you're there from Ender Energy. And May Tassin. Ang? No. Please come from IIED. So, I want to start with you, Richard. We almost going to follow the order you're sitting in. So, I know a lot about your work, so you will tell us much more. But Richard works with the Center of Dialogue on Human Settlement and Poverty Alleviation, or CODOSAPA, as we normally call them in Sierra Leone. Can you tell us, and maybe also show us, if we have a PowerPoint, a bit about the history? About the data that the slum dwellers collect in your communities, and also what happens when you bring that data to the engagement with, for instance, Freetown City Council, which I know you work closely with, and to the national government, and maybe also how you feel that data changes the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Michael, and I'm happy to be here, actually. So we collect different set of data. We collect settlement level data, and we also collect data on households, and then we collect data on other issues like other social issues. We do social studies, understanding what are some of the challenges within the settlements and how those actually can be addressed. But then in Sierra Leone, we have this slogan that we have 3 core components. So we have data, action, and impact. That is our focus. We are not just collecting data, we are actually collecting actionable insights that will actually inform how planning in informal settlement are being driven. So our work with Freetown City Council, for example, through the data processes that we have done, we have been able to influence a huge national policy, which is the Land and Country Planning Act, that now recognizes informality and mandates municipal councils to provide essential services to these communities. So we are not just collecting data for data's sake, but we are actually creating actionable insight that can be used for planning as well as policy formation. That is our goal in Freetown.
Thank you. Can you explain a bit more? So what you might not know is I'm touring the world with some of your data sometimes, because it's one of the best examples that I know of, like how you used information collected to divide, make these different zones and negotiate what kind of interventions were possible and needed in the different zones. Can you tell a bit more about that process?
Yes, so that is actually the settlement level data. We start by understanding the administrative boundaries of the settlement, and then we do infrastructure mapping, understanding what is there, what are some of the spaces that we can utilize. But then one critical component is also the ability to classify the settlement into zones. So we have the high risk zone, which is zone 1. We have the medium risk zone and the low risk zone. The reason why we do this classification is for us to be able to understand what kind of intervention is needed. Normally, if we take the communities as a whole, it is difficult to actually tailor interventions that addresses specific zones or their needs. But then when we classify the communities, for example, in zone 1, we know exactly what needs to happen. If we are doing like housing projects, we know the kind of structures that it can accommodate and how those processes are being carried out. So that is the kind of understanding. But then we work closely with community members. All of these processes are being community driven. They actually undertake the processes from start. And then we are working closely with the municipal councils because we know our data alone cannot influence policies. But then when we get the councils to come in and support the process, to be part of the process, not just to utilize the data, but being part of the collection, they can actually own it, and that can now be a point of discussion to influence policies. So that is the kind of process. And what we have been doing over time, our data process has evolved. We started manually using paper-based questionnaires, GPS, but now we are collecting more of spatial data using drone imageries, remote sensing, understanding what is there, collecting high-level accurate data, working with humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, for example, to be able to showcase the data that we are collecting. Because we are saying we want to collect the data, we want to create the impact, and we want to actually ensure this impact are sustainable and that reflects the needs of our communities. So we are using technology to actually collect the data, following the standardized processes, but as well as ensuring that communities are driving the process. So the utilization of technology is not an excuse to actually exclude the community members, but it's actually a way to leverage their potential and harness their contribution to the entire process. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Richard. I want to move to you now, Fabrizio. Richard's just told us about the work they do in Freetown. And I know they do some of that work with you at Humanitarian OpenStreetMap. I also know that the history of HOT, if I remember, dates back to the Haiti earthquakes, where maps created by an online community of volunteers, mappers, enabled much more effective and efficient responses to the humanitarian crisis there. Based on your experience now working, for instance, with Richard and other places with community groups, I want to ask you, what's the power in terms of, like, if you look at how the data and the maps that you're part of producing promotes inclusive, locally led adaptation and resilience building, how do you see those open mapping technologies that you have support that power redistribution in slums and informal settlements?
Thank you very much for the question, for the invitation, and for our audience to be here as well in this very hot day here in Belém. I just love your story, and as he tours the world with your data, I also tour the world with your story and the work that you and my colleagues have been doing on the ground, because it has been amazing. Like at the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, basically we want to put the power of data and the power of open geodata in the hands of communities. And what my colleague has to say here just exemplifies in a beautiful way how this is done. The reason OpenStreetMap exists is because it's a community source map that everyone can use. And our journey started, as Michael was saying, in Haiti a long time ago, moved basically by human suffering. So people in Haiti, people like the Red Cross, people like Médecins Sans Frontières, the first responders on the ground, didn't have a map of Port-au-Prince at the time. So using satellite imagery and very basic technology in those early days, we managed to build that map. And this was volunteer work. The world has evolved. There's now better imagery. Unfortunately, not better access to it. There are drones, except most of these drones are very expensive. And as a result, not many people can fly them. So we are still in need of data from the territories, from the world. But unfortunately, those who are able to get it are often people that are not part of those territories. And so, for instance, we have plenty of stories in Africa, Latin America, when we fly people from Europe to actually gather data in, some remote part of the area, where essentially the people in that area, the people in that community, are able to do that because we provide open source technologies that are able to do that, and they are perfectly skilled. Furthermore, like by engaging in this type of work and the work we did in Sierra Leone, the work we are doing currently in Dhaka, the work we are doing in Colombia, in Mexico, it's also about empowering mostly young people to actually uptake these open source technologies. So it has all these externalities, positive externalities, if you wish, that is not only about the data collection or the data gathering. It's about empowering. It's about the sustainability of the tools in contexts that are really difficult to get internet, to get infrastructure. And it's also about how this technology enables, as a platform, communities to act. They don't need to ask for our permission. The tools are there. They're open. And as a result, that's our contribution, if you wish, as a digital public good, if you wish, like something that everyone can step and use. But in the long run, that also needs to be sustainable. And I think that's the beauty of getting communities engaged. So in terms of power redistribution, I will think that, just to answer very completely the question, it's about giving the tools that the community can own for its own development. So in this case, they hold the data. They're able to analyze the data. They're able, because they have a positive environment around them to influence the city mayor in this case. In other cases, as in Guatemala, or as the Inga people in Colombia, they had to fight to actually claim back the territory, but with the knowledge that they have created themselves about the territory. So it's not always clear-cut, right? Like it's not, there's no one model that serves all communities. But what is important for us, at least, is that this technology is used in a way that communities own the data and are able then to action on that. Our part here is about supporting the technical aspects of this work, making sure that the data is open where it's appropriate. In most of the cases it's appropriate. There might be a case in which it's not. And making sure that that can be actually used in accordance to our mission. We were set up to map the home of 1 billion people. That was our audacious claim, if you want, early on in this organization. We are about to do that, actually. Hopefully, this is some news, like if all stays on track, in February, we might get to that point. So the good news is that could be done. But as communities evolve, more data, more quality data is needed. And that's the reason these tools, such as the drone tasking manager, exist, because technology has evolved and needs at the hyper-local level has evolved as well. And that's the gap we want to bridge, and ideally the gap that hopefully helps community to bridge their needs as well in an informed way.
Thank you so much. A little disclaimer before we move on to you, Isa. So we deliberately kept the panel a bit short in terms of people, and also the introductions from the answers from each panelist, because we really hope we can have a conversation and that some of you also have inputs and questions. So we'll go to Isa and then May, and then we will have a chance to actually open up. So please, your questions and ideas and own inputs, please save them for very soon. Isa, we work together in a partnership around promoting locally led adaptation. Through that, I've heard a bit about your work in Senegal, and I was hoping you can tell all of us both what work you do in climate adaptation focused, and how you bring community data into those processes.
Okay. Hi everybody, I'm Issa from Senegal. I'm working in an international NGO called Energised. So to share our little bit experience about how we are managing community-led data as tool for power and redistribution. Next slide. Okay, we in the early start of the LLA, the GLA project, what we have to do is, before starting to do nothing about adaptation action in local communities, what we did is to integrate community-led data in our work. We have conducted a kind of baseline studies that will help us to know in each eco-geographical areas, because in Senegal we have 6 eco-geographical areas. Before doing something in each eco-geographical areas, we do this community-led data. And to realize this activity, we do it with the Federation and the CBOs that based in the local communities. And the outcomes from the baseline analysis show different results. But we would like to share just a little bit about the climate risk. The more significant climate risks are the drought, the flood, and the high temperature. For example, if you see in this graphic, you will see the Casamance eco-geographical areas face high temperature risk. Is very significant over there. And you take another area, eco-geographical area, you will see also how the rain is starting late, and we have some lack of rainfall distribution during the rainy season, and that affects the crops production. And all this action led us to different vulnerability in the communication, the community areas. Next slide. Just about the vulnerability of each eco-geographical areas, you will see with us the decrease of crops productivities, the soil degradation, and the relative crop loss. These one are very significant in Casamance, in Basse RCJ. The Basse RCJ is in the central areas, and this zone face different challenges, mainly about the salinity and the erosion. All these actions show how local communities and how eco-geographical areas are facing the climate change and how they are vulnerable. And based on that, we ask communities what adaptation action they are doing before our intervention. And depending on the geographical areas, communities show what they do and the initiative that they promote. And that led us to have a little bit how we can act based on this data. We'll see the lack of finance comes to the CBOs, because in these studies we have discussed with CBOs, but also the local authorities and the local governance. The financial need is very, very important to implement the LLA action. That's why, as an NGO, we are not financer. We have not a financing mechanism. What we are trying to show the national government how to promote, how to help locally led action, how to fund grassroots activities. That's why we are providing funding to local communities so that they can identify, prioritize, and implement the adaptation initiative. That's the first. And we are empowering community by enhancing capacity in managing fund and reporting for the accountability, because they are accountable for the fund they receive from us. And amplifying impact, how this microgrant can help local communities to amplify, to have more impact. And all this evidence that we are gathered, we will put that in a national platform that we are leading with other NGOs platform to try to showcase all information that we have by civil society, to put them in the national NDC. That will help the government of Senegal to take into account what civil society are doing on ground into the NDCs. Just what I would like to say, and I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isa. Now, over to you, May. And maybe you have the toughest task of the panel here, because we really want you work with climate finance. And in our network, there's often a saying, it's not actually about the data. If you think this is about the data, you're wrong. It's about the money and lots of other things, the plans and so on. But it's a lot about the finance. So I want to ask you, considering these examples, can you share your perspective on the potential of this kind of community data to enable that shift towards localization, towards locally led adaptation that we're working on in our program?
So, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay. So, I think it might be useful to give a little bit of context to what our program is. We've talked about it a lot. So I have the privilege, I'm working at the International Institute for Environment and Development, and the privilege of working with SDI and ENDA and other partners to generate ambition on locally led adaptation. And what we're doing is taking the evidence and the data from the ground, from the vulnerability assessments that you're doing, ground truthing, understanding what really is needed, and then translating it into something that donors, climate funders can understand. So we work to influence policy at different levels. And so a lot of our partners are using the data to influence their municipal governments to change climate adaptation plans. We also work at the national level. We work in indigenous territories, and we also work at the global level with climate funds, with bilateral donors. And I would say that this data is really important because what we have is not a lack of data, because we have a lot of data that we know we are using in the communities that are actually being used to upgrade slums and do adaptation on the ground. The translation issue is at the global level, where we work with donors that say, well, we know this data is really important, but how do we convince ourselves and our institutions to use this data and change our institutions? So our role as the consortium, our program, is to take the key messages from the communities and try to convince donors to change. And the translation is, the message becomes a little bit different, I would say, in the translation. So it's not just about saying we need more data at the community level, but we change the messaging to say we need the data to change institutions. So institutions, climate finance institutions need to transform the way that they give finance, the way that they work with us. So they need to change the way that they do contracting, the way that they do monitoring and evaluation. So these are very practical things, but ultimately changing those things transforms the way that climate finance goes to the local level and enables really good data collection and actions on the ground. There are other ways in which the data is really helpful. So one of the things that we always get asked is, well, we know there's data on the ground, but how can you package this data to make it more usable for us as climate funders? So they say, can you prove the value add of locally led adaptation? Can you prove that it is actually cost effective? And so we work within our consortium to sort of repackage the way that communities are working, the way that we work with climate funders, to repackage that information to a key message that's more advocacy-centric. So that's another way in which our program is working to take data to influence policy. And finally, the last thing I'll say is there is an issue around data opacity. And so I think all of you mentioned this to some extent, that what the donors see is something like NASA level data. They see land use change, they see climate finance going to local projects. But what you see is my neighborhood, my street is getting flooded, and my neighbor's house is not getting flooded. So what we need to do is translate that high-level data into something that can connect with the local level. And this is the same with climate finance too. Donors know that their funding is going to locally led projects, but they don't actually know which organization is it going to, which household is it going to. But the communities that you work with know who is receiving the money from the savings group. What have we done with the money to improve our household, to install slum upgrading. So we need to take that climate finance data and connect the higher level data to the lower level data on the ground as well.
Thank you so much. So this is the time where you're also very welcome to questions or inputs. I see Andrew, you want to go first?
Thanks, Mikhail. I'm Anju Sharma from the Global Center on Adaptation. And when we started work on our locally led adaptation program way back now, I think in 2012 or something like that. But for us, the work that you do was the gold standard of locally led planning, right? That this was a process that was community led, that worked strongly with the government, was integrated across sector, and strongly evidence-based in data collected by communities, right? When we talk about leaving no one behind, etc., disaggregated gender data, that's what you guys do, that you generate it. So for us, it became our guide. We developed a guide based on the work that was done in Mukuru. And this is the guide that we now give to all our partners. And essentially the way GCA works is that we support international financial institutions like the World Bank to embed adaptation into their projects for the LLA work, right? So we, for the LLA work, essentially what we tell them is that if you're talking about resilience among communities, the communities have not yet had a chance to really understand as a community what climate change means for them. And the process that you do is the process by which every household is a participant, understands what climate change means for their livelihood, for their housing, for their food security, etc. That's the level of data. The plan is, again, as I said, sort of, it's owned by the government. So we've done this now in 9 countries in Africa and I forget, in I think 12 or 13 cities in Bangladesh, right? And the really heartening thing is that everywhere we've done it, we have complete buy-in from local government agencies to the extent that we come doing it for the project. They tell us, help us build this into our guidelines for local planning. To the extent that, if one example is Homa Bay in Kenya, right? We started this process and the governor said to us, you know what, we don't have a plan for our municipality. There's no land use plan. Can you make this the land use plan? And for us, that was fantastic because it was a plan that started from the informal settlements in the municipality, right? They started the planning process. They led a process that was then gazetted by the government and became the sort of land use plan, so it could draw on national funding as well. So I mean, it's an amazing process that I think should become the way, but I want to also very quickly say that our vision for it has to be that at the end of the day, it's a process like this that local communities do, that is owned by the governments as well, but then all the donors get behind supporting. Because on a project by project basis, it's putting far too much, it's requiring too much capacity at the local level. So once the communities have done that plan, it's a fantastic baseline to assess progress by, right? It needs to be something that all the bilateral donors, the national governments, etc., then get behind. And that needs to be our vision. That is an integrated, community-led plan that everybody then supports. So I'll stop there.
Let's take 2 more and then 2 or 3 more, and then I want to get it back to our panel. Please also introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Eliza. I work with an NGO called Ground Truth Solutions in Austria, and we do perceptions research with communities around the world on the humanitarian and climate assistance they receive. It was really interesting to hear everything that's happening, and I was just curious if part of the data you collect is also perceptions research to understand better community experiences, to also bring that into the decision-making process, is something that we found is incredibly essential to complement other types of data being collected to make sure that it's really aligned with people's needs and priorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next to you, please. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm Sabir Rosario. I'm representing the International Center for Climate Change and Development. We are based in Dhaka, Bangladesh. My question goes to Mr. Richard. So you were talking about the classification at the community level. So if you could expand a bit on the criteria that you have set for this classification, And also the second question is about how you were managing the social challenges, I would say, because once you were doing some sort of intervention at the community level, there are different challenges within the community. So how are you tackling those sort of challenges? If you could give some examples. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Kilion Nyambuga. I work with SDI in Kenya. And I think mine is not a question, but also to contribute to the discussion. One is asking why community-led data is important. To the Federation is the beginning point at which we bring communities together to start thinking about the community as a collective. So it's more of a tool that is being used to mobilize community members, to organize them. And the most important, one of the unique things about this process, the community-led data, because I know there are different introductions or definitions of community-led data. Some people engage a few community members and they're calling that community-led data. So the most unique thing about the process is that the ability of the communities to be able to follow through this process, right from collection to asking the right questions during decision-making process, to making the right decisions that are based on their context and also based on the evidence that they have collected. So that is one of the most unique things about the community-led data. And it has given, I think, a number of good examples. And I think beyond what Anju has mentioned, I can also bring in the aspect of the planning processes that are currently being taken along Madare River in Nairobi. But we also have more of a citywide planning that has been conducted in one of the cities in Kisumu, called Kisumu City, where all the 37 informal settlements have been prioritized through data that has been collected by the community members through a participatory risk assessment process that was being supported by SDI Kenya, and we had also the university because of also the context, also the understanding, their role also, and also the county itself playing part in kind of translating those evidence into plans that are actionable. Thank you.
Thank you, Killian. I dare to put myself in here also with a question, though before I refer it back to the panel. So it's been highlighted how data really is important for the planning purposes. Can you maybe take that one step further and reflect on how community data can also inform the implementation and the action, and maybe the monitoring of these plans? And then there was a specific question to you, Richard. There was one to all of you on the perception, if that's data you also collect. So, Richard, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the direct question to me, you are asking around how do we actually classify the communities into zones. It's actually an extensive process. We start by conducting risk assessment, understanding the level of vulnerability in the various areas within the community. And after we do risk assessments, we also do some geospatial analysis to understand the number of affected structures or demographics of people that are living in those areas. Then we have gone a step further to also do what we call the geotechnical assessment, understanding the soil bearing capacity of these places. I mean, looking at areas, for example, that have been in Freetown because it's a coastal city, so people reclaim land from the ocean. So some of these areas, the soil is not stable for construction. So we try to understand all of those dynamics and then work with community leaders, based on the findings to agree that, these areas are considered red spots, these areas are considered to be in the yellow zone, and these areas are in the green zone. So those are like the processes that we do. In terms of how are we managing social issues, when we started, it was quite challenging because classifying communities into red zone is kind of sensitive. And people that might fall within those red zones might be very much hostile to the entire process. But then what we instituted was the community learning platform. So we created what we call the community learning platform, which is a democratic space that every member within the community can attend and voice out their own contribution. So these spaces were like places where they meet, deliberate issues, and they agree as a community, devoid of outside interference. So the community learning platform is 100% organized by communities, and we don't actually encourage outsiders coming into those spaces, because these are spaces where we allow the communities to do all of their discussions themselves. But then as part of the process, we actually link that up to the city learning platform, which is now a space where the communities take lessons learned at community level and bring it to the city level. And in this platform now, we invite policymakers, we invite duty bearers, we invite planners, we invite key stakeholders within the space to be part of the discussion. So communities come, they present their problem, they discuss the solutions together, and they agree on the way forward. So those are like the kind of processes we've been able to carry out to address some social challenges. Yeah.
Thank you. Isa, maybe you want to respond to the question about perception data.
Sorry, can you repeat again for me?
There was a question to what extent you might collect data on people's perceptions around risks, around vulnerabilities, as well as, I think, solutions, assets. And I know you've done some of that. You actually do collect this as sort of perception data. So maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Thank you. About the people perception of the collecting data, mainly what we do is try to come near to the local community and to try to understand the problem as they are facing it, the problem. And that will help us to reduce the barriers for having real data and to showing them the interest of having this data from them and the interest of gathering this data and how this data can be led to the national government. And at the end of the day, after that action, that we should be convinced to coming based on data that they gave us, they will be possible and flexible to give us this data. And after, they will easily have finance mainly from us as intermediaries. But if the problem is in a bigger situation, sometimes I will help the governments to have more detailed information, and that will help them to have a better impact in their intervention in that locality or in the eco-geographical areas.
Thank you. So I had the chance to see a little bit closer up one of Isa's graphs there, and actually the heat that's a perception that's being collected as people scoring the heat as one of the biggest issues in some of these settlements.
Yeah, and maybe, Michael, I can add
very short, Richard, and then we move.
Yes. So we also collect perception data a lot, because even when we are talking about adaptation, I mean, we often say these places are vulnerable to a lot of climate risk, but then people are still adapting to some of these risks. So we collect a lot of data around how are they coping with the emerging climate issues, and what are some of the capacities that they have within that they can actually use to address some of the risk.
The biggest sounding board in the world. Fabrizio.
Yes, so I would like to address what the first speaker mentioned as the gold standard. And we're really glad that we made it. The problem is, though, it's a gold standard that it's very small. At the moment, like the crowd around this gold standard, it's relatively small in the higher scheme of things. So I think we proved this is possible. I think the case of Freetown is just marvelous because it sets the whole thing in a way that it's evident. But unfortunately, like to scale this, we need a different way of financing it. We need a different way of engaging with communities. From a tech perspective, we also need a way into these open source, open data services become acknowledged as some sort of basic public infrastructure in which we can build, all these things. So there are alternatives to this. So the good news, which I share with you, this is possible. Like your argument in 2012 is proven. Like the challenge there is like, okay, how do we scale this? And I think that that's part of our mission at the moment in terms of how do we sustain this in the longer run? What kind of technical infrastructure will allow this to grow? And also the new challenges that are emerging, which is around potentially perception, heat. So in this country, in this city, we were approached by education authorities to help them to train population about the understanding of extreme climate events, and in particular, like the heat waves. And we were surprised to say, like, well, and this comes back to the perception question, in a sense, like, people here do not see a heat wave as something out of normal. And as a result, they keep going to school. And as a result, things keep moving. And obviously, this is a major disruption. And there's the perception element there, but there's also the data element there, in a sense that a lot of this data could be collected with relatively, low-tech tools, a bit what we have done with the drones, and as a result, engage the community in a way that they understand what's going on. So it's not only about the tech, but the engagement process. And we are trying to do that. I think the last point I would like to make, which I think comes back to how do we use this data in planning and monitoring, it's about meeting people at where they are. So how many, I will do it the other way around. Does any of you do not use WhatsApp? There you go. All of you are WhatsApp users. I became one when my son went to school because I didn't have a choice. Before that, I used Signal. But the issue there is like people use WhatsApp all the time. In Melissa's incident in Jamaica, probably you saw it in the news, one of the worst hurricanes that Jamaica experienced. We use an application called ChatMap, which works with WhatsApp, which works with Telegram and Signal and others, but basically allows you just to take a picture and upload it to a map. That's simple. And that allowed Jamaican authorities in the early days of the incident to understand the situation on the ground where connection was available. As connection became more available, more pictures emerged. And so it's also a challenge to think what kind of technology is going to meet people where they are and what's going to trigger change. And that will be my last point on this.
Thank you so much. Last but not least in the panel, May. Maybe if I can take the liberty to put my question to you around monitoring. Like, if we start talking about locally led monitoring, when we engage on locally led adaptation, what do you see as the potential and role of locally led monitoring of plans and policies?
I think locally led monitoring is really powerful because local communities on the ground that have installed the interventions can understand how effective it is in real time. But I think the challenge is linking those systems of monitoring to reporting systems for the donors, right? So on the community side, that impact of whether this is resilient after a heavy rainfall incident, you can get that monitoring immediately. But how do you translate that into donor level data on how many beneficiaries are there, how many women in the household have been have benefited from this project, how many publications have impacted how many communities? That it's really, so this also is another translation issue. That impact monitoring is not necessarily linked to the reporting that we have back to the donors. And I think that's what we're trying to do in the GALAR program, is we're trying to tailor the M&E system so that we can take the donor level reporting and have it be fine-grained enough so that partners, SDI affiliates, and also ENDA Federation members can input into the data collection, but not have it be so onerous that it's very impossible to understand and it's just an additional burden on their time.
Thank you so much. Joe, I've asked you to come up here and close this session. we just heard from Anju that the Know Your City approach that you've been part of developing is the gold standard, or was the gold standard in 2012, I think you said. Okay. Maybe tell us about what your takeaways are and how you keep developing what you're doing to keep it the gold standard.
Thank you, Michael. I think I'm going to keep this very brief. I know all of you are dying to get out of Hell's Kitchen. We launched Know Your City in 2012 during the World Urban Forum in Medellin, in Colombia. And I think it was after recognition that a lot of our cities, specifically in Africa, the cities do not have accurate data on informality. They, some of them were absolutely clueless where the informal settlements are. And I think from there, when we launched the Know Your City, it was basically a platform, it was basically a process, and somebody was talking about data as a means to the end. But what we have been doing for us, data collection is a process that stirs community action, that stirs community taking action and taking responsibility and setting their development agenda. It's also a catalyst of engagement with the city authorities, with the national authorities. It's also a catalyst for communities to identify, prioritize their challenges, and eventually identify which duty bearer is responsible. It's also a catalyst, and data has equipped communities since that time in terms of, because of the knowledge that the city doesn't have the information, using that information to leverage. Coming to the city, we know you don't have this information when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to planning, when it comes, we are going to provide this for you, but in return, these are our priorities and this is what you want. And I think since we launched it, the other thing, when you talk about community data, we think it's just community walking around, collecting information, engaging, just talking about. I think we have also discovered that in terms of getting the city to buy into the process, because initially it was very difficult for community to present this data. It used to be garbage in, garbage out. It was not taken seriously by this. But once you bring the city from the beginning to designing the questionnaire, designing the tools, there is a level of ownership by the city, and be sure that whatever comes out of it is going to get a budget, is going to, whatever the committees have decided is going to be also to be prioritized in terms of setting the development agenda. The other thing I wanted to mention also, I think just picking up from what is happening in Freetown, the partnerships, because at the moment there is a big discussion around data, and I see a lot of alliances being made at the global level. I know UN Habitat is building a platform and inviting everybody in the data space. But for us, the meaningful partnerships is what makes sense on communities on the ground. That is what is being demonstrated in Freetown. We are not interested in some global alliance where we come to these spaces, to the COPs, to the World Urban Forums, make noise, show how smart we are, nice platforms, but they are absolutely disconnected with the reality. And for us, our data and the partnership we seek, and this is something that we have been doing over the years with IAD, we want to create a partnership around data that will inform in Krube, in Madare, in Mokuru, in Freetown, in Senegal, the kind that will inform a development. And the other thing I think we also acknowledge, and I think it's also to acknowledge our strengths. I think as SDI, what we bring on the table, the data, we give it life. It takes an advocacy element, but also we also recognize that there are certain skills, there are certain level of skills that we don't possess. Hence, these partnerships getting hot, OpenStreetMap, getting Tech on board, getting IID to talk about this. And the last one, just to talk about, now we are talking about, everybody is talking about the climate space. This is the last one, Mikel. Just sit, relax. The last one, I think, it's this data is also a way of amplifying. First of all, is give these communities credibility. Number two is to amplify, to make them visible, and to amplify whatever adaptation, whatever resilience, whatever strategies they are using at their communities to cope with these disasters. I usually say all of us are running to this space where we are trying to solve new problems around climate, that these problems have always been there. But communities assumed, like you said, that it's hot. People have always been used to hot. It's hot today, they go to work. But for us is how do we amplify these solutions, and how do we, when you talk about financing, that's another discussion altogether. We know there's a lot of resources around data and around finances, but we don't know where all the money is going to. But thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you, May, Fabrizio, Isa, and Richard. I know that there's a lot more to hear from the people in the panel. I'm sure there's also much more to hear from you, so if you're not in a hurry, please hang around and check in with each other. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.